Friday, as you will remember, marked 5 years since Brexit, but by this time tomorrow, could we be sliding back to Brussels as a rule taker?
Well, that's the warning from the former Brexit minister, David Jones, ahead of Sir Keir Starmer jetting off as part of his big relations reset.
Well, this is what he said in November when he was asked about the possibility of pursuing a renewed deal on post-Brexit relations.
Been very clear that I don't think the deal that we've got with the EU is good enough, and that's why we are resetting that and looking for a better deal, whether that's on security and defence, hugely important, but also on trade.
I think a lot of people are a bit worried that maybe we're cozying up to the wrong people because of post-Brexit. Also China, but more on that in a moment. Let's get the thoughts of political commentator Duncan Barkes, who's with us in the studio. A very good morning to you. Do you feel that Keir Starmer's doing his utmost to sort of reverse things?
Yes, I think I do. So, 17.4 million people voted leave back in 2016. We won't rehearse the arguments. I think we all still bear the scars. The optics of this don't look good. And I think also we've got to consider that we have someone new in the White House here who we'd quite like a buoyant relationship with and a trade deal who's not a big fan of the EU. So when you have the Prime Minister disappearing off to Brussels in 24 hours' time to go and have dinner with 27 member states in their heads, it is not a good look.
Well, except he's saying... I'm not saying we have to take him at his word, but we are told, it's about, bespoke deals, a bespoke customs union. He said in the past, we're not going to join the single market, we're not going to join the EU customs union, we're not going to have free movement of people. So have we got anything to worry about?
Yes, we have, because this is a man whose government's U-turned on various things inside the last 6 months. So I think there's an argument to be made, which is you can't necessarily take at face value what the Prime Minister has said. Look, I think you look at the optics of this, it doesn't look great if you're someone who wants Brexit. And let's be honest, when we talk about Labour, they did everything possible to actually block Brexit when they were in opposition. So I completely understand the cynicism and how some people, when they read the Times newspaper this morning, might be thinking this is not a good look. The other thing we have to consider here is the political ramifications, because this will be weaponised by Nigel Farage's Reform Party, which is already, in some polls that have come out inside the last 3 or 4 days, are ahead of all of the other political parties, including the Labour Party. So for Farage, I mean, this is golden, isn't it? Because you can easily make the argument, which is, you voted for Brexit, look what they're doing now, vote for us, because if we get into government, we'll ensure there's a proper Brexit. I also think, just touching on the Trump stuff as well, and we mentioned tariffs a few moments ago, we've got these tariffs that have been introduced by Trump in the last 24 hours on Canada and Mexico as well. A lot of economists are saying, look, he might do this on EU member states. Britain might be all right, but we don't know at the moment. He does have an issue with the EU. So if it seems like the Prime Minister is going further and further towards being friendly with the EU, that puts us on a collision course with Donald Trump.
Can I just ask you about whether it was our second headline this morning, the immigration issue?
Yeah.
Because, again, that's why I don't understand why Labour sometimes seems to just shoot itself in the foot. We know immigration is a big concern in this country, and they're rowing back on some of these issues.
It's extraordinary.
Things like, if you come to the UK legally, you can never become a UK citizen.
It is bizarre. So just a bit of context and background on this, and I've had to make some notes on this because it's a little bit complicated. So there's a new bit of legislation that Home Office ministers last week published called the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, and it's the small print here that the Telegraph have been wading through to reveal that they will basically repeal chunks of a previous law that was a Conservative Party law, the Illegal Migration Act, that came through Parliament in 2023. The two key points of this is that Act included a provision which meant that almost anyone who entered the country illegally was ineligible, for settled status and ultimately citizenship, so they couldn't become a citizen of this country. It also featured another clause that stated that asylum seekers could be treated as over 18 if they refused to take a scientific age assessment. Now, I think most people watching GB News this morning would go, well, this is common sense. You've got people illegally arriving to these shores. It's only right and proper that we test them to make sure we know who they are. And certainly, if they come here illegally, they shouldn't necessarily have an easy way of being granted citizenship.
And we also know, don't we, that there is evidence that some adults are being groomed or, shown how to come over as children and claim that they are.
So some really interesting stats in the Telegraph piece. In the first half of last year, more than 1,300 illegal migrants were caught pretending to be minors. Those arrivals who are classified as under 18s are given school places and housed by local councils. So what we're seeing here is this idea that we don't test them. What happens elsewhere, just to give it some background and context, in other European countries, including France and Germany, they use medical tests to help determine the ages of young asylum seekers. What we're looking at here is this idea which we go, oh, we might not do that anymore.
There's nothing to say.
And I think the thing to add to this is it goes back to this idea that it was a very contentious issue for some, that when the Conservatives were in power, we had this deterrent of Rwanda, which is you come to this country, you're going to be processed in Rwanda. And there are examples around the world, most notably Australia, but elsewhere, that if you process in a third country, it does work as a deterrent because people go, oh, I don't want to go there. We don't have that deterrent anymore, and this piece in the Telegraph rather suggests that we're going further down this route of making it more attractive to come to this country.
It would appear so. Duncan, we've got to leave it there. Thank you. I'm slightly lost for words just with it all, because it's just, well, we don't... Even in the papers yesterday, Tony Blair, love him or hate him, saying, you don't just bring in ID cards because immigration's the big issue and it will help. And then they announced this, which seems to be saying they're going a bit softer on immigration. And
what about, is it a worry, what about the government's apparent growing connection with China? Because, Rachel Reeves was over in China, coming back very thrilled at her growing relationship with that country. And now we learn there's a huge spread in the Daily Mail today talking about the fact that China wants to build the biggest embassy in Europe, in Britain, in London, by Tower Bridge. It's basically the site of the old Royal Mint. And it has been, they've been asking for planning permission to build it for quite a few years now. That's what it will look like if it is ever built. I mean, it's enormous, and it's right next to Tower Bridge.
But the police opposed it?
The police have opposed it. The Secret Service have opposed it. The local Tower Hamlets Council have consistently opposed the planning permission. But now Angela Rayner has these special powers to wrest certain decisions away from local councils. She has taken it over now, and it is thought that it will now go ahead. It's the biggest Chinese embassy in Europe, right bang in an area where everybody seems to think it's far too sensitive, or far too big.
Odd, isn't it? Well, meanwhile, on the other side of the pond, a trade war it's more than brewing. It's underway now between the US, Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, President Trump has signed an executive order placing 25% tariffs on goods imported from Canada and Mexico and a 10% tax on Chinese.
Well, Canada and Mexico have hit back, announcing their own retaliatory tariffs.
I am announcing Canada will be responding to the US trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods.
Well, we're now joined by Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. Hello, Greg.
Good morning.
Gosh, I mean, since President Trump got in, I think you're going to be in the studio more and more talking about things. But has he started something that he can't control now, or do you still believe in what he's doing?
I believe in what he's doing based on his past experience in his first term, and also that he's telegraphed this from the beginning of his campaign. So there's really no surprises in what he's doing. Perhaps the speed and the volume of what he's done so far is a surprise. But, the fact that he was threatening tariffs, it shouldn't be, it was very well telegraphed in the past. So.
Yeah, well, indeed. And he's, he's following through on what he said, which is in some ways refreshing.
Yeah, it's honest.
But is he doing this to protect America? Is this about America first, or is it a negotiating tactic for other issues like border crossings?
It's both, but it's more the latter. I mean, really what this is all about is bargaining to encourage Mexico and Canada to do what they should do on the border. And that was the number one issue and has remained the number one issue, going back to the campaign. But this is what American voters want. And so, he'll use the threats of tariffs if the Justin Trudeau and the Canadian government doesn't respond appropriately to the threats, he'll actually impose them. And so there's a chance that these tariffs never go into effect. I thought Justin Trudeau was almost comical in his response. Trudeau will lose. And this is a war that I would not fight if I were Justin Trudeau. The Canadian exports to the U.S. are 21% of their economy. For Mexico, it's higher. It's actually 30%. 21% of GDP for Canada. American exports, U.S. exports to Canada and Mexico are 1% of GDP.
Yeah,
it's a rounding error. So shut down the border. Stop sending fentanyl to kill our young people. Stop.
That's a Canada issue.
Without a doubt. And so it comes across both borders, Mexico and Canada. Much of it is manufactured in China, thus the 10% tariffs on China. It's a pretty simple one. It's
But is it simple enough for Canada to address?
It should be. It should be. But unfortunately, Trudeau is obviously he's a dying brand, right? He's leaving office, but this is a last-minute attempt to show some sort of manhood, which is an utter failure, because that's not something I would try if I were Trudeau. That ship has sailed. And so, he had a chance here. He went down, he threw out his own, he basically buckled on his own self-respect and went to Mar-a-Lago, a few days after the election to kiss the ring. And he had a chance to do something. He had a chance to do the right thing. But he is still stuck to the virtue signaling from Ottawa that he just can't separate himself from. And so this is really sad for the Canadian people. And they're being misrepresented. If the election were tomorrow, he'd lose by 20 points.
Because you said this is in many ways a negotiating tool.
Yeah.
He's also said a couple of days ago, there's something very big coming for the EU.
Yeah.
What's he trying to get out of the EU?
I think, as we were talking earlier in the first segment, I think, again, negotiating tool for sure. Trump is not a fan of the EU. Biden was very much a fan of the EU and showed that in his disrespect for the United Kingdom in constantly favoring the EU as well as specifically Ireland. And so this is, a chance for the EU to get ahead of this, and especially a chance for the UK to get ahead of it. I do think, I'm not sure that tariffs are coming for the EU. I don't think they're coming for the UK, but
who knows?
You never know. And, there's a lot of unpredictability. Markets like certainty, and they're not going to get it from this president. What's more important to President Trump is Main Street, not Wall Street in this case. So he'll sacrifice the certainty that markets love for the ability to negotiate on what's best for not just America. It would be better for Canada and Mexico if they shut the border down, if they shut down fentanyl labs, if they actually did what's best for their citizens, which Trudeau is clearly not doing right now.
OK. Greg, I know we're going to see you later on, but for now,
of course, see you.
Gosh, they're interesting times, aren't they?